Reality Check. We will talk with Small Cell Forum on its recent NFV deal with ETSI and speak with 4G Americas to get an update on the role virtualization is set to play in 4G and 5G network deployments.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, editor-in-chief of RCR Wireless News. Sorry about that. Recently, the Small Cell Forum announced a partnership with ETSI on its NFV program. The deal calls for exploring synergies between the two organizations in the deployment of both Small Cell Forum, or small cells, and ETSI's NFV organization there. Today, we are joined by Mark Grayson, who heads up the virtualization work at the Small Cell Forum and is a distinguished consulting engineer at Cisco to talk a bit about the agreement. Mark, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, Don. Well, you're welcome.
Great. Well, maybe I guess give us a quick overview of the agreement. I know it was announced, I believe it was last week, but obviously it's a good deal between Small Cell Forum and ETSI kind of on the NFV work. And give us, I guess, a little overview there on the announcement.
Yeah, sure. So virtualization has been something the forum's been looking at for some time. And in particular, I guess when we look at ETSI NFV, we see a number of use cases being defined there. And from a mobile perspective, use case 5, use case 6 are the, applying NFV to the 3GPP core network, and then applying NFV concepts to the base station. So those have been the focus area from the forum. Initially, our focus has been on the former one of those, looking at the virtualization aspects of the core network. Mm-hmm. And in our most recent release, so at Mobile World Congress just back in February, we launched our release 5, which was termed rural and remote. Mm-hmm. What we found with rural and remote is we were looking at sort of an aggregate set of use cases, which as an aggregate were very significant in terms of the market opportunity. But at each sort of atomic level had scalability, which was somewhat below where small cells had conventionally been targeted. For example, your conventional residential play, your enterprise, your urban. When we're looking at rural and remote, we're perhaps looking at some remote industrial applications, some transportation verticals, where we really wanted to look at the use of the NFV technology, not to scale up as massive data centers, but to really scale down and tailor the scalability of the small cell solution to the rural and remote deployment use cases. Yeah,
and that's an interesting part of this, because it does seem like you're right. I mean, NFV in general, when people think about virtualization, they think of a very big picture scenario here where, you get virtualization controlling these large networks and data centers and IT space. And then you look at Small Cell Forum and you think of, again, like you said, kind of a, this kind of moving in and densification and things like that. So, I guess from the outside, it does look like an odd marriage. But I guess when you look at it deeper, though, it does make sense, because with small cell deployments, I mean, you're looking at thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of these things being put out there, and controlling all of this is going to be a huge challenge for mobile operators.
Right. And quite clearly, when we're looking at that sort of breadth of deployments, we can't rely on physical network equipment, which has come out of a cellular industry, used to scaling to the millions. I now need to support a remote, a mining operation. Yeah. How do I get infrastructure on site, which then is dimensioned to address that particular opportunity? So as I said, that was the first focus area of the Small Cell Forum. But now moving forward, we kicked off a study almost 12 months ago, which was looking at the use case 6, which is applying virtualization to the base station. Mm-hmm. And then posing the question about how should we be looking about applying NFV techniques to the small cell itself. We were seeing the narrative of Cloud RAN being sort of, I guess, owned by the macro vendors in terms of a CPRI-based decomposition, which is based on sort of ideal transport characteristics. Yeah. And when we look at small cells, the majority of those are deployed over non-ideal transport. And therefore, we've re-examined that particular space to say, how should we be looking at decomposition of a small cell into a physical network function and a virtual network function, which then supports transport over these non-ideal networks.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense too. Because, like you said, I mean, small cell deployments are going to be a huge challenge, and again, the backhaul situation, the power situation. I mean, there's a lot of big challenges there, and it does seem like it seems like what you're saying then is, using virtualization can definitely ease this deployment model, and obviously the automation, different things like that. Being able to control these on the network, I'm guessing, is a big push for what small cell farm is looking to do, and maybe helping operators in the deployment model with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so we recognize that we often need to interact with the macro layer. So if the macro layer is virtualizing, then how does that impact the interactions between the small cell layer, which we believe is going to virtualize as well?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, how do we marry up those the intelligence, the coordination that's required in order to deliver the new scaling tools and procedures required for this sort of transition towards this virtualized world?
Got it. And obviously the timing of this seems like it's pretty good too. I mean, I know small cells, they are being deployed, but some may say that perhaps the deployment has been a little behind schedule, but it does seem like there's a timing between a broader deployment of those and this move towards virtualization really seems to be lining up pretty well, where, as operators move towards virtualization, which is happening pretty rapidly here. And again, with small cells being deployed, it does seem like a good time, I'm guessing, for you guys to be working with ETSI on what they're doing, because obviously ETSI is kind of the standards body that people are looking towards when it comes to kind of, if there's going to be a standard for NFV, they're kind of the one everybody's looking at. So it does seem like the timing seems pretty good for I guess, an agreement between small cell forum and ETSI on this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, we've seen, I guess that we would call them the initial sort of virtualized RAN deployments, as we say, based on dark fiber.
Yeah.
And recognizing that there is going to be that in of itself doesn't really scale, because we can't get that type of transport deep into the network because it comes with its own economic challenges. And therefore, if we're able to marry the whole concepts of decomposing a small cell into a physical network function, remote radio head, and some virtualized functionality that sits within a data center, while simultaneously enabling that to be transported over a wide range of Ethernet-based transport, we really have the foundation to accelerate the adoption of this capability, not just from a small cell perspective, but candidly, in the broader market, looking at how should we really optimally look to decompose base stations. Because I think what's different from the other use cases that we have from an ETSI perspective is we always recognize that when we decompose a base station, when we virtualize a base station, we can't virtualize the complete base station.
Sure.
We always need a radio element. We always need a physical network function to terminate the RF. And so the first problem to solve is which functions, how do we decompose, how do we split the base station between the physical network function and the virtual network function?
I guess as you look at that part of it, I mean, how far are you along in I guess working on that part of it? Because like you said, I mean, obviously you do need at some point a radio antenna out there making all this stuff happen. I know there's been lots of talk about virtualization potentially replacing everything in a network, but obviously there are some parts that can't be replaced. So I mean, obviously, and so I guess how far are you guys along? And I guess in making that move, or I guess coming to some sort of a standard or some sort of a way to kind of make this part of it happen.
Yeah, so as we said, so almost 12 months ago, we kicked off this study. Our study is set to conclude in June this year. So at the Small Cells World Summit over in London, June this year, we'll be making a public the output of that study. And that study is looking at all the different ways we could decompose the small cells, and then making some recommendations as to follow-on work.
Got it. Okay. Now, I guess obviously, small cell forum, a lot of members there. How important is this virtualization move towards the membership there and their view of the advances in small cell? I'm guessing it's a pretty big part of their views moving forward.
Yeah. So if we look back at the focus of the forum, we have what we call, the forum releases.
Yep.
So we started off with residential, then we moved to enterprise, then we moved to urban, and now we're just in remote and rural. So those have been to date the focus of the forum. Really now we've closed out that particular piece of work. Okay. Because now we've got sort of examples of small cells being deployed across that complete range.
Yeah.
Now, as you say, the focus of the forum is absolutely looking at virtualization, looking at the impacts of 5G, and interesting, you note the the 4G America's work of the role of virtualization as we move to 5G.
Yeah.
Because the operators, from the forum perspective, absolutely highlighted that as one of their questions to answer. How can we use virtualization to ease the transition towards whatever 5G becomes?
Yeah, and I mean, again, it seems like the timing of this all seems because, like you said, I mean, 5G is at least in talks at this point. I mean, obviously, we're looking at probably still another 5 years before anything's actually out there. But between that, virtualization, obviously, small cells are going to be a big part of not just LTE Advanced, but of this 5G movement. It seems like it's going to be a big part of this. It seems like all these new pieces are coming into play here, which are really going to be central to kind of this evolution of what the network is going to look like. I mean, it seems like 5 years from now, the networks that we know today, I mean, some of the parts will be the same, obviously, like we said, the antennas and things like that. But it seems like a lot of the network is going to be a lot different than what we view as a traditional cellular network of the past.
Yeah. So I think there are some common themes. We're going to have densification.
Yeah.
And I think compared with where we've been in the past, this continual appetite to consume more and more data means that the only way we're going to support that is on a denser and denser base station grid. So I think that, that argument is over. Everyone agrees that we need to densify, but also from an ease of deployment, we need to perhaps change our tools and procedures.
Yeah.
Because now we're no longer pouring concrete and deploying large towers. We now to shift to deploying candidly millions of small cells. So that's one aspect. The other one is we need to recognize that there is sets of spectrum out there, and we need to enable our operators to aggregate that spectrum in its totality to be able to address this opportunity. So that could be using license and license exempt and maybe even lightly licensed. So I think now we're seeing a shift between that densification and really the spectral aggregation, that I now need to be able to aggregate all these assets and then use both of those axes to provide the massive data that we see for the users.
Yeah, like operators always say, I mean, they have to use as much in their toolbox as they can to meet this demand. I mean, obviously, it's spectrum, it's towers, it's small cells, it's virtualization. I mean, everything they can throw at it is what they're going to need to do at some point, because I mean, usage is not going down, that's for sure. Yeah. Well, I guess as you look at what ETSI's been doing, obviously ETSI's been at the forefront, obviously, of this NFV movement, kind of towards virtualization, working on standards. Release 1 came out last year. They're working on release 2 now. I guess what's your view on how well they've been kind of, staying in front of the need for this? Because it does seem like operators, unlike past perhaps standards or different initiatives, it seems like this one's really being driven by the wireless operator, telecom operators. How well do you think ETSI has done in staying, in front of the need and the demand for virtualization?
Yeah, I mean, our relationship with ETSI from a forum perspective is around those particular use cases, and so we're looking to leverage that as much as possible. I guess to your point, what the nitty gritty about the MANO definition, about whether we truly have something which is multi-vendor and interoperable, because that's another key question that we have as a forum. Is we see lots of as an industry, lots of approaches to deploy virtualization, but many of those are in proprietary implementations. And so a core question that we have as a forum is, can we have virtualization and a multi-vendor ecosystem? And so that comes back to the role of standards as we decompose how are we going to define those interfaces between the individual elements. But that is front and center of our operators' requirements moving forward. We can't jump forward with virtualization if we lose the whole aspect of multi-vendor ecosystem that we've worked so hard to cultivate over the years.
Yeah, that's right. That's a key point of all this virtualization talk, is the fact that I mean, if this doesn't all work together between different vendors, it just becomes a bigger mess for operators going forward. And that's something they want to try to avoid, like you said. I mean, they want to be able to make these things not necessarily plug and play, but pretty close to plug and play, or at least automated enough to where they can make these things work without having to check every connection constantly. I mean, that's got to be a key part to all this. So,
right, and candidly, that's been one of the successes as the forum. A little known fact is that the small cell ecosystem is built on a multi-vendor definition, such that I can get my PHY from various different vendors, and the whole industry has adopted sort of a common decomposition as to how to build small cells. So we have that multi-vendor aspect, but also the work that we do with ETSI around plugfests to ensure that we have multi-vendor equipment that can interoperate as well. So obviously we do have established relations with ETSI on that sort of basis for the interoperability testing.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Well, before we wrap up here, I mean, I guess as you look ahead a little bit, obviously this announcement, it's still fairly new. I know you've been working with ETSI for a while on this, though. I mean, do you see any big challenges? I guess what's, as you look ahead on this agreement and kind of what the small cell forum is trying to do here, do you see, I guess, what's the things that are keeping you guys up at night or making you guys most stressed out about how this will all progress for both the small cell forum and also for ETSI?
Yeah, so I think it's whether there's a one size fits all, or whether we need a framework, and how do we handle those multi-vendor issues when we're in a framework, in particular because transport plays such a key role, the characteristics of the transport. We have a decomposition today based on CIPRI ORI, which is very much focused on ideal. We're going to get another decomposition likely, which is based on sort of sub-ideal, but how many different transport types do we need to accommodate, and how does that impact the adoption of this technology moving forward, in particular, from a marketing perspective, for ensuring that we have multi-vendor capabilities as we have these breadth of use cases. And looking at 5G, I guess it's the same. We have everything from the machine to machine, small packets, long battery life, to the very high data rate, low latency. Can we have a single system which spans that broad range of requirements? We have exactly the same from a transport perspective. Yeah. Can we have a single system which is able to accommodate the broad range of transport characteristics that we see in small cells?
It sounds easy. I mean, no big deal, right? It's to be knocked out in a week or two, but but obviously I know you guys, like you said, you guys have that show coming up in June in London. I'm guessing we'll probably see some more news from that there as well on the topic. And again, a lot of work for you guys ahead, it looks like, but again, a lot of smart people there. I'm sure you guys will get it all figured out. It's all ones and zeros at this point. So you guys get it all knocked out, no big deal. But well, hey, Mark, we definitely appreciate the time and insight today on the topic. And hopefully we can catch up again soon as you guys progress with both, just working on the small cell stuff in general, but also this agreement with ETSI too. Hopefully you get some updates with you going forward too. But thanks again for the time today.
Hey, Dan, it's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right. Well, great. That was
Mark. Is going to be, obviously something.
A distinguished engineer, make sure I get this right, at a consulting engineer at Cisco. Again, Mark, thanks for the time today. We appreciate it. Sure. All right. So, recently I had a chance to talk with Chris Pearson, who's the president of 4G Americas. Chris recently returned from make sure I get this right here, the Next Generation Mobile Network event in Europe, the NGMN event in Europe, where virtualization was a hot topic. I spoke with Chris about what he witnessed from the event in terms of virtualization.
Virtualization is going to be, obviously something that is a reality now. You're seeing many of the companies, both operators and vendors, develop partnerships for virtualizing certain parts of their network. And I think the stuff that operators are looking for is efficiency within their networks, and that has an effect on CapEx and has an effect on OpEx. So it's a very timely discussion, and it's a reality today. I also think virtualization between now 2015 and the 5G networks in 2020 and beyond will continue to develop. I think I don't think anybody's going to wait for 5G to do virtualization, and they're going to look at their networks and see what needs to be done and how it can be done and where it makes sense to be done. Having said that, I do think virtualization will be an enabler for many of the things that are being proposed at this time for 5G. So it's definitely, virtualization is definitely a reality. I think each carrier will have a different technology roadmap for the timing of virtualization and when they might want to do it. But again, operators are looking to save on OpEx and CapEx, and virtualization could be potentially one of the ways that they do that, and at the same time, providing high levels of customer service to their customers.
All right, well, that was Chris Pearson with 4G Americas. For more of the interview, you can check out the RCR TV site, where I spoke with Chris a bit about, I guess, continuing to work towards a 5G standard, which is obviously, discussion there with Mark a little bit earlier, a big topic of discussion for a lot of people in the industry. And also talked a bit with Chris about the runway he sees still for LTE and 4G. Obviously, there's still a lot of work that could be done with LTE Advanced in terms of helping operators deploy their networks. So interesting insight there, but please check out the rest of the interview there on the RCR TV side. Well, that'll do it for this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I want to again thank my guests, Mark Grayson and Chris Pearson, for their insight today. Also, if you got any suggestions for the show, we are always open to suggestions. Please let me know at dmeyer@rcrwireless.com. That is DMEYER@rcrwireless.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter at Meyer_Dan. That's Meyer, MEYER_Dan. Always like the insight there and the talking with the viewers. But again, thanks again for watching the show this week. And as a programming note, we will not have a show next week. I will be doing something else. But we'll be back the following week with some great guests. We're going to be speaking with the Onos project on its recent Blackbird release, which should be pretty exciting. And also a conversation with UbiCube's CEO on their view of NFV space. So again, no show next week, but a show the following week with some great guests. So definitely check that out. But again, thanks for watching the show this week, and we will see you all soon.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter at Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN, and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.